Jonathan asked to talk about the health of the ecosystem. And I think that, like our friends at St. John's Health that work with me to help monitor my health, we with the National Park Service, the Forest Service, other agencies, we track the vital signs of the ecosystem, right? Just like I pay attention to my healthcare providers pay attention to my heart rate and my respiratory, my weight, which I need to lose 5 pounds, my cholesterol, whether I drink alcohol, exercise, whatnot. We pay attention to what's going on in terms of the ecosystem. And I think that there's a lot that we know about the ecosystem. And there's actually parts of the ecosystem that we don't know much about. The parts of the ecosystem that we know a lot about, it's actually pretty healthy. I will, to use Jason Baldus, who we'll be hearing from later, I think he captured it, captured it really well, that if we think about it, today you can see the ungulate species, the major predators that Lewis and Clark and the Astorians saw when they came through this ecosystem. And that is a result of a concerted level of effort over the last several decades at the local, state, federal, NGO efforts to be able to restore and have those sustainable populations. There are also things that we don't know about. It's actually kind of shocking. We really don't know the health of the snake. We really don't know much about the condition or the health of the Snake River, which is really kind of surprising. And I think one of the most important things that we at the National Park Service are paying close attention to, working with the state, is just the ability of wildlife. That's why you have the migration corridors, the ability of wildlife to be able to move around on this, landscape. And why is that so important to us? So I'm actually going to come at this from a little bit of a different angle then. Whoop, wrong way. That's a little bit of a different angle. So where have we been, right? I think it's important to recognize that indigenous people have been paying attention to the health of this ecosystem and the health of the communities here from time immemorial, 10,000 years. Those of us from a European background, little less time frame, but for the last 99 years, it's been a topic of conversation. It was 99 years ago that a collection of community leaders got together at Maud Noble's house up in Moose, to meet with the superintendent of Yellowstone, because they were concerned, and I love this phrase, they were concerned about the tawdry development that was beginning to happen in Jackson. Because they recognized at that time, 99 years ago, they were seeing those community leaders, the future for them, I want to say the future for them at that time, was tourism and building an economy based upon tourism here. And they were concerned that the direction that things were going 99 years ago was going to have an adverse effect on the scenery, the wildlife, the very reasons that people were coming here. Through the 20s and the 40s, the National Park Service, working in concert with the community here, pursued a very deliberate strategy on that first bullet. The idea that people coming and visit here were going to be highly dispersed through this area, through Jackson Hole. Much of the initial plans, there's a 1941 management plan for Grand Teton National Park, and there's a quote from it, right, in terms of what the intention was. And I think it's not that we need to be constrained by the past, but it's important to understand that we are informed by the past as we are moving into the future. In the 1950s and 60s, so Teton County was viewed as an impoverished community, one of the poorest counties in the country. There was a massive federal investment that was made here. Jackson Lake Lodge, Signal Mountain Lodge, Grovant Campground, Signal Mountain Campground, Leaks Campground, the marinas, all of these things. Much of the 150 miles of the trail system was rehabilitated in the park as a very specific effort in order to be able to accommodate growing visitation that were coming to our national parks around the country, but also here. Also kind of interesting, the almost $1 million low-interest loan was made to the resort to be able to build the tram at that same time. All right, 70s master plan continued to push that in terms of the idea that visitation to the park, which was driving things here, would be highly, highly distributed, highly dispersed. And a little bit different, it's not so much that the visitors are a resource, it's the visitor experience is a resource, right? We think of the quality of the experience, the ability to come experience solitude, the ability to come and see wildlife, the ability to come and to be able to fish in clean waters, the ability to see the night sky, the ability to be able to hear natural sounds. That visitor experience is a resource that we care deeply about and that we're trying to manage. And a overall strategy was to try to maintain a world-class visitor experience by trying to disperse people across this landscape. The other thing that was significant, really significant from this master plan, 1971, National Park Service installed our first limits. There are limits in Grand Teton National Park. 1971, we put a limit on the number of overnight accommodations. Number of campgrounds, number of hotel rooms are capped in Grand Teton. We'll talk about the implications of that in a minute. So, continue from that time, we have continued to adapt, and as Jonathan said, accelerating change. Change has picked up and affected us in a variety of different ways. Not the least of which is, while there's this list here on the screen, I think it's also really important to talk about huge conservation successes. Grizzly bear population is thrived, and we now live in fully occupied grizzly bear habitat. If you don't believe it, look at the Jackson Police Department that had videos of 399 plus 4 walking through their parking lot last summer, right? Not necessarily a good thing, but a huge conservation success stories. Peregrine falcons, our nation's symbol, the bald eagle, has recovered in the last decades. And you can go around here in Jackson Hole and you can see that wildlife. And people come from all over the world in order to be able to do that. What's interesting is, so this is our visitation in the park. And I know we can have conversations about how the numbers count, but if you just take the trend line. And this is each year, January through August, since that's the figures that I have for 22. And you can see that trend line. Visitation at Grand Teton National Park in the last 10 years has gone up 20%, not counting this year, through last year. 20% through last year. But it's not just numbers. People are visiting in different ways. In the last 5 years, we've had a 50% increase in trail users. So it's not just about numbers of people that are coming, it's about they're doing different things in different ways. And we're feeling that, right? All right, so here's the question, right? Who thinks that trend line is going to be different in the future? Right? So if that trend line continues for another 10 or 20 years, what's the implication for us? So I talked about it in 1970s that we capped the number of overnight visitors in the park. So what you'll see here is that 13% of the visitors to Grand Teton National Park spend the night in the park. 87% of our visitors spend the night someplace else. They drive into the park in the morning, they drive out of the park in the afternoon. Our traffic counter data shows you clearly that curve, right? So when you talk about capping visitation in the park, you need to be having a conversation about capping that percent of 87% of the visitors who aren't spending the night in the park. They're spending their night someplace else, generally within about 120 miles of here. People are coming from spending the night as far away as Idaho Falls, Twin Falls, Riverton, to be able to do visits to the park. So as I said, part of the strategy the Park Service has, I would say from my perspective, this community has adopted, which is to disperse visitors for a range of visitor experience around the community. Right? We have different kinds of visitor experiences in different places in this county. Just Two examples. Chad's going to talk a little bit more about this in terms of the implication on the forest. Really interesting thing from studies that we've done last year is in Grand Teton National Park, we don't have a traffic congestion problem. I'm not saying there's not a traffic congestion problem in the county. I'm saying in the park, we don't have a traffic congestion problem. Generally speaking, our roads are very high level of service. Not talking about entrance gates. That's an entrance gate challenge in terms of going through. But moving around on the roads, we don't have much of it. But you know, when you drive back into town in August and you're stuck in line from Flat Creek getting in, or you're driving Highway 22 for the morning or afternoon commute, legitimate problems there. Those aren't in the park. All right? What we do have is parking challenges. So at places in the summer, like at Taggart, we have twice as many cars as we have parking spaces. Same as in the winter. Twice as many people trying to park in there as we have parking spaces. Lupin, about the same. And notice the timeline. From before 8 o'clock in the morning, the parking lot is full, till 8 o'clock at night, right? Go back and think about the trend line and what that trend line might mean for us. One of the really interesting things that we have learned in the last year is that our strategy for 100 years of moving people around the landscape, it continues to work really well. There is no defined travel pattern. We're not like Yosemite, where people are trying to get into the very eastern end of Yosemite Valley, 3 square miles in the eastern end. We're not like Zion, where people are trying to get into the end of the Zion Canyon. We're not like Glacier, where people are trying to get to Logan Pass. People are going all over the landscape in no particular travel pattern, and they're stopping in many, many, many different places. I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that's true outside of the park and throughout Teton County. One of the things that's really interesting is people are going to different places for different reasons. They're going to Lupin for a high primarily to seek adventure and active physical activity. They're going to places like Coulter Bay because they want to get together and have family time and to be able to relax. But overall, they're going everywhere in the park because they want to see wildlife. People come here because they want it, because it's a resource-based education. So it's or experience, right? So the question we have is, how do we maintain this world-class visitor experience? Particularly, how is it that we maintain this resource-based, visitor experience? And I think some people spoke to this, and it's just in the center here. Shout out to Carlin Gerard and the folks at the Teton County Conservation District who are just putting together this Mountain Neighbor Handbook. And it's a nice little compact example of talking about the one set of values that are present here in the community. A set of values that is oriented towards the conservation, what it means, and what each one of us can do on our individual basis in terms of trying to live into and preserve those values. But I think as this conference is highlighting, really what we need to be having is a conversation about how we work at scale and how we work up and where are we going. I'll be straight up with you is I kind of view, some of you heard me say this, I view visitation to Grand Teton somewhat like the stock market, where you may have down years, you may have multiple years, even a decade, where things are flat. But the trend over the last 99 years is pretty consistent. We went from hundreds of thousands of visitors to 1 million. We hit 2 million in the 70s, 3 million. We were approaching 4 million last year. We're down. But I think, as I asked the question earlier, where do we think that we're going? What we are right now, the posture that we're in is that we are looking at our history. We are looking at where we've come from, and we are thinking that trend is going to continue in terms of people staying in overnight accommodations within 3 hours of Grand Teton and wanting to come and visit. And then how is it that we have to be prepared in terms of trying to meet that demand that is out of our control that we're responding to. We're deeply, deeply interested, though, in what we can be doing in terms of working together to make sure that the very reason that people are coming here, to be able to see grizzly bears and elk and pronghorn sheep, to be able to fish in the Snake, to be able to see the mountains, to be able to have quality, memorable times together, that we take the steps that are necessary in order to be able to preserve all of that. Look forward to our conversations.